Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And unfortunately after this weekend, I'm rather black-pilled on the whole situation because frankly, there are a lot of things that have happened that have made me readjust my view on certain people, let's say. We're going to get into it, I'm going to try and be as unbiased as I can, but unfortunately in doing so, I think I'm going to annoy quite a lot of people because I'm not going to come to conclusions that you are going to like, especially if you are sympathetic to Lowe in this whole situation. So I'm going to front load this with some fair points. So Lowe was hosting a glitzy reform donor dinner just hours before being thrown under the bus, quote unquote, with the police probe along with the internal probe that Reform have obviously hired a KC to investigate. So it's not entirely fair to say that kind of Rupert Lowe was on this side of wanting to undermine Reform the whole time. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think this whole situation, as I say, is very complicated, and I think we're in the dark on an awful lot of it. Unfortunately, because certain people, let's say, have been commenting on all this over the past weekend, more than we should probably know is being brought up here. As I said in the last video, we can't really know things until, well, this investigation and police probe are actually allowed to go public. All we know so far, really, at least when I made last video, was that we know that there have been allegations sent to Reform that they are acting upon. They have to remove the whip from Rupert Lowe because that's standard parliamentary procedure. Rupert Lowe obviously disputes these claims, as basically everyone who loses the whip does. That's completely understandable. And we also know that Rupert Lowe claimed that there was no credible evidence, and in fact the KC was shocked and dismayed that there was any claims of any credible evidence. We're going to get into that bit. For now, I want to make it very clear that Rupert has quite clearly stuck his flag in the I'm not coming back to Reform side. Evidence of this? Well, this tweets, Nigel Farage needs to take back control and sack Zaya Yousaf. So clearly he's got an issue with Zaya Yousaf. Is it enough to try and make violent threats? Who knows? That's something for the police to investigate. And he's also had frankly petty snipes like this. If you want real loyalty, get a dog with a cute picture of a dog. Which is a good PR move, but I'm from the age of YouTube where I remember Counter-Strike Go lottery website funders were found to be scamming their own audience, and then when they made the apology video they got a dog to front load at the start of the video, so forgive me for viewing this whole thing with a degree of cynicism. Anyway, as I went into my video last Saturday, Rupert Lowe was making all sorts of statements. I made frankly a rather remarkably silly interview with the Daily Mail. And so, obviously, Farage has responded to this. Now, I'm going to front-load this again with a criticism. I don't think Farage should have written this. I don't think he should have made any sort of comments on this, but obviously he's felt to some level compelled to, just because of how much Rupert Lowe was on Twitter, to put it nicely, making his criticisms and his feelings heard. So after mentioning that people are fed up with party infighting, Farage says this, now thanks to one of our MPs, Rupert Lowe, unloading a barrage of criticisms against our operations and its main actors, that sense of unity has been dented. And as I say, this is why I am very critical of Mr. Lowe for doing that interview. I get a lot of people replying saying, can't he have decent criticisms of Reform? And as I say in the last video, it's bleating what Ben Habib has said about Reform for quite some time, and I frankly don't see them as good criticism. In fact, as I said in the last video, it looked more like a direct insult to Reform and its operations. The truth is that Mr. Lowe has made some excellent interventions over the past 8 months and helped to stimulate public debate on a range of pressing issues facing the country. I agree with that, obviously. What many people may not have realised, however, is that in that time he's also managed to fall out with all his parliamentary colleagues in one way or another. We did our best to keep a lid on things, but in the end, containment strategies invariably fail. One clear example of this difficulty I have in mind occurred in the chamber of the House of Commons just as Parliament was about to enter its Christmas recess. It was the last parliamentary debate of the year. Mr. Lowe, who represents Great Yarmouth, asked Mike Cain, the Transport Minister, a question about the MV Ruby, a damaged cargo ship which had docked in his constituency while carrying hundreds of tons of potentially explosive fertiliser ammonium nitrate. I think it's fair to be concerned about that. Mr. Lowe was unhappy with the answer that he received from Mr. Cain, and at the end of the debate he crossed the floor to make his feelings known. The confrontation ensued, heated language was heard, the minister's shoulder was pushed, in the end the sergeant-at-arms had to step in to calm things down between the two parliamentarians, as is his job. There is a classic juxtaposition of Parliament, quite frankly, in that it is a place to get very, very rowdy, but there is a clear limit to what that rowdiness can entail. Physical touch is obviously hugely banned, and the language you use in Parliament has to be parliamentary. You say, my right honourable friend, you don't call someone else a liar, things like this. It sounds like Mr. Lowe was breaking them and the Sergeant-at-Arms had to come in and intervene. Largely in nothing, but Nigel Farage goes on. Commenting on Mr. Lowe's conduct later, Mr. Kane told GB News that the anger displayed towards me clearly showed the man was not in charge of his own faculties. Nobody in Reform UK said anything publicly about what happened, instead we carried on. And this is going to be a running theme. A lot of claims from the Reform UK side are, yes, this is what we were doing about Rupert Lowe. He was making problems behind the scenes, and we largely wanted to keep it quiet and keep a lid on things to try and get through all these problems and to make it look like we had unity. And effectively, in the end, that's become impossible. The fact is that sadly there has been too many similar outbursts from Mr. Lowe, often involving the use of inappropriate language to the despair of our Chief Whip, Lee Anderson. I've been surprised and saddened at this behaviour. Certainly I never saw anything like it in the European Parliament in 2019, and when I was the leader of the Brexit Party and Mr. Lowe was an MEP colleague. Again, I want to make it very clear. I'm not saying that this is God's truth, that this is gospel. I'm saying that there are two sides to this story. We have no idea which is true, and I think that it is remarkably poor of an awful lot of the online right to give absolutely no credence to the claims that the Reform side are making. Everyone is assuming they're lying and Mr. Lowe is telling the truth. Unfortunately, as I'm going to go through, I think we have less reason to actually trust Mr. Lowe after this weekend, which is completely different to my take in the last video where I said, I don't really know who to trust, we don't know enough. Well, you wait and see, and you end up finding out that actually the story being built up, actually it's probably not as simple as a lot of the people on the online right are saying. And I was asked in the comments last time, who do I mean by that? I may as well just be explicit. It ranges from an awful lot of online activists on the right, obviously. It ranges from people like Connor Tomlinson, who's kind of mainstream, but mostly on the online right side at this point, all the way to, let's say, your homeland activists like Steve Laws, who are frankly white nationalists. It's quite a wide net, but one thing that I keep noticing is that they all seem to be parallel on one thing, and that's that they give barely any credence to reform. And this weekend has shown that they are fine with doing that at any point. And I don't want this channel to necessarily be the channel that is picking a side without the proper evidence, let's say. I may as well be honest at this point. I'm siding more to believing the Reform side of the facts at this point. And as I say, I want to go through the evidence as to why. Because this whole thing gets worse. So last week, the chairman of Reform UK, Zaya Yousaf, showed me 2 letters sent by female members of staff to our party HQ. Each letter contained an accusation of workplace bullying involving Mr. Lowe. Now, when I made an update on yesterday's video, I took that to mean Mr. Lowe was the one doing it. In fact, it's been clarified many times over since, including on the Friday the accusations were made, that Mr. Lowe is involved insofar as not fully cooperating with his duty of care to these people. That is specifically what the accusation is. One of the incidents in question is alleged to have taken place within the parliamentary estate, which is even worse, because Parliament is a sacred place. As a responsible political party, Reform UK have a duty of care to every single member of staff, whether they are employed by us directly or indirectly, and with that in mind, I believe that our chairman was entirely right for Reform to appoint a KC to conduct an independent inquiry, and it is inconceivable that we would simply ignore such allegations. Again, if these charges aren't completely trumped up, Reform have actually done nothing wrong here. This is entirely within not only what they should do, but what the law compels them to do. They are compelled to do this with workplace law. If you ignore this, you can end up at an employment tribunal and frankly sink the party. Anyway, Farage then starts speculating, which I really don't think he should be doing. So whether this turn of events prompted Mr. Lowe to use a newspaper interview this week to launch a political attack against me, I can't say. All I know is that Mr. Yousaf was presented with complaints which he could not simply disregard, and this is the way of Reform UK. And then he goes into, let's pretend that we didn't take it seriously, basically it would ruin the party. And then goes on to champion genuine accomplishments made by Reform over the past few months to try and professionalise it. Again, trying to directly refute what Rupert Lowe was saying in the interview the other day on the Mail. Which, again, I don't think there's any need for this at the moment, but unfortunately, there is such a Twitter storm about this, it's kind of difficult not to, but I really would have landed on the side of, no, don't say anything. So Yes, criticism of Nigel Farage there, so anyone calling me a fanboy again, there you go, I'm not. I do my best to be fair and unbiased, so there we go. Anyway, after this was published, Rupert Lowe decided to comment on absolutely everything in that Reform's initial statement, and so he breaks it down for us. So, it is with regret we feel obligated to disclose that the party received complaints about the bullying allegations within the offices of Rupert Lowe. So, these allegations aren't against me personally. Again, I want to make this very clear. This tweet was sent out on Sunday the 9th of March. This was made yesterday. And the point about it not being allegations against Rupert was known since Friday. I want to get this timeline right because, as we'll go through in the video, there are points of this narrative from Rupert Lowe that have gaping holes in them, frankly. So just bear that in mind. Both these employees only raised their complaints once disciplinary proceedings had started against both of them for serious offences. They both admitted to these offences, no complaints whatsoever before. Parliamentary HR was involved in every step, full parliamentary process was followed. Again, this is all stuff that Rupert is saying. And again, it's stuff that we don't particularly know about, and by the way, it's stuff you definitely should not be commenting on while the investigation is ongoing. That is a major, major error here. One worked in his parliamentary office and the other in his constituency office. I've heard nothing from the parliamentary authorities. Again, HR have been fully supportive every step of the way, and I've had a huge amount of evidence to prove it. I'd say at least he's not trying to post out evidence here, because that really would be a huge mistake when it comes to this investigation. But I would say that just because these complaints were made in Parliament doesn't mean that the parliamentary authorities were involved. You can deal with these things internally, which it sounds like, at least from Rupert's side of things, that's what's happened anyway. So evidence was provided to us of workplace bullying, targeting of female staff, raised concerns, and there was derogatory and discriminatory remarks about women, including reference to disability. Rupert saying he didn't make these remarks, the comment mentioned referred to a different member of staff's remarks. He's already claimed that before anyway, so he's just reiterating it. Fine. These are from leaked WhatsApp messages, again according to Rupert, we don't know this yet for now, but it turns out that the woman who these allegations were made against resigned before the process could actually finish. Her MP is now responsible for mildly inappropriate comments to their staff that they make in private conversations. Yeah, they actually are. This is part of the duty of care. You're actually compelled by law to do it. Like, this is why we get so many ridiculous workplace tribunal outcomes, because the law's ridiculous. You might not like the law. I don't like the law. At the end of the day, you got to follow the law. Otherwise, you've not kept your nose clean, and then the lawfare is just open to be used against you. Which, again, might be the case from Reform here, but I'm not seeing much evidence of that. But that doesn't mean it's not true. Reform has deliberately conflated the accusations to make me look guilty. Again, there is no credible evidence against me on any of the bullying whatsoever. I want to say again, there is no credible evidence against Rupert Lowe is something that he is claiming, not just once, but he did it the other day, and I covered it in my video. Bear that in mind. We feel we have a duty of care to all our staff, whether employed directly or indirectly. Accordingly, we appoint an independent KC to conduct investigations into these complaints, and to date, Mr. Lowe is yet to cooperate, to which Mr. Lowe says, false, I've spoken with the KC at length on multiple occasions. I've asked for credible evidence against me, none has been provided. To say I've not cooperated is an outright lie. My legal team are on this. And this is one point that we really just don't have evidence to say one way or the other who is lying and who isn't lying. I believe that Rupert Lowe has spoken to the KC. In fact, the KC pretty much confirms that. The problem is that just because you speak to the KC does not necessarily mean you're cooperating. But as I say, we don't know one way or the other. In addition to these allegations of disturbing passive behaviour, Mr. Lowe has at least on 2 occasions made threat of physical violence against our party chairman, and that's gone to the police. This is total nonsense. In December, Zia and I had a robust debate. We moved on, or so I thought. This was then reported to the police the day after I raised concerns about party leadership months after the event. What a disgraceful waste of police time, weaponising the process to blacken my name. So that was indeed one of the events, and Mr. Lowe here has obviously said, oh, I had a robust debate, in that this is probably where one of the events is referring to. However, obviously there are 2 events here, and according to Richard Tice, the second event was actually in the past week, obviously, when a lot of this has come to a head. Now, again, we don't really know any more than that. All we know is that there have been 2 events, one last December and one over the past week. And whether these 2 were actually genuine threats or not, again, this is for the police to decide, and something that we have to just hang back and say, We don't know what's going on here. Wait for the police report. Wait for the investigation. Reform stands for the highest standard of conduct in public life, and we will apply these standards without fear nor favour, including within our own party. So we are clear it is now Reform policy to remove MP if a staff member makes vexatious complaints, even whilst they are going through a disciplinary procedure following serious offence before any investigation is even allowed to start. Yes, again, this is standard parliamentary procedure. There's entire articles on MPs having their whip removed because they're being investigated. And that sort of stuff typically happens just before the investigation officially actually starts. Or there's an investigation pending, he's had the whip removed. Like, I don't even need to get sources for this. This has just been the case for the past 5-10 years. Do I think it's good? No. But clearly it's procedure. What do you want them to do about it? They can't go against procedure. So as I say, Rupert Lowe making all these comments and making this big long tweet, huge mistake. I don't think anyone should be commenting on anything from Reform. But unfortunately, things like this are going to lead to Reform having to make statements back. It's a rock and the hard place because at the end of the day, it's quite clear that Rupert Lowe, whether rightly or wrongly, is trying to craft a narrative around this. And that already is making me quite suspicious. This is the type of thing I would expect from someone, frankly, who isn't cooperating. And I don't say that with any ill will to Rupert Lowe. A week ago, he was my favourite MP. I'm saying this out of pure disappointment. I don't want this to be the case, but it is clearly been shown to me that Rupert Lowe has been acting incredibly unprofessionally as a result of all this. And you might say, oh, well, of course he has. He's been lied about. Well, one, we don't know about that yet. And two, even if he has, he shouldn't be emotionally driven and being unprofessional like this. It is not forthcoming of anyone in Parliament. And also later that day, it was announced by Dan Wootton from his YouTube show, or on Twitter, sorry, that Rupert Lowe will respond live for the first time to the allegations made against him by Reform UK tomorrow, but today obviously at 5 PM. This is a disaster. You should not be doing that. That is unbelievably poor form. I know everyone's saying that he is being lied about, however, the more that he is effectively protesting too much about it, the more I'm quite suspicious of it. And unfortunately, we actually have confirmation that behind the scenes it's because he's being encouraged to do it, but I'm leaving that bit for the end. For now, this response and going on Dan Wootton, huge mistake, and people not being at least somewhat suspicious of all this, that's just hysterical to me. People are firmly behind Rupert Lowe, and I'm beginning to think that it is a massive mistake. Obviously, it might not be, and they might get lucky, but as I said yesterday, this is pure luck and not based on any of the facts that we actually know so far. From the facts that we know, it doesn't look great for Rupert. Not in terms of the allegations, in terms of his reaction and professionalism to all of this stuff that has happened. It has been clear that his goal over the past weekend has been to attack Reform. Now, whether that is righteous justice or retribution for them being unfair on him, I don't know. But the thing is the thing. Nobody knows, so let's not make vapid assumptions like that. However, it is clear from the facts that we have at hand he is trying to attack Reform. And it's poor form, especially when he was saying, oh, let's just patch things up a few days ago. I don't believe him, frankly. Anyway, it was then reported not too long after Rupert Lowe made his rather large rebuttal to Reform's allegations. This news came out. So last week, Lowe said he had spoken to the senior lawyer looking at the claims and said that she was shocked at the process and that there was no evidence that had been given against him. However, on Sunday, yesterday, the lawyer, a KC who has not been named by the party, whose credentials have been verified by the BBC, said, I've seen a number of statements made by Mr Lowe MP which are attributed to me and which describe my reaction in the process conducted by the party into allegations made against both Mr Lowe MP and his constituency manager. I find myself in the unfortunate and regrettable position of having to make this statement to correct the record. The lawyer added, I have not expressed either dismay or shock at any time as to the process, nor have I said that there is zero credible evidence against Mr Lowe, let alone said this repeatedly. This is direct confirmation that Rupert Lowe has been lying. That is direct confirmation. I hate to say it because I did not expect this from Rupert, but my hands are tied on this whole thing. There is no other commentary I can give. Mr Lowe has lied. I suppose I should address some common arguments I hear back from this. One is that, well, the KC was hired by Reform, and therefore she's going to be on Reform's side. I do not buy this one iota, for a few reasons. One, KCs have absolutely no trouble getting work. They are one of the most in-demand professions in Britain because everything's about lawfare these days. Number 2, if a KC is going to be biased, and there are biased KCs, they are going to do it in such a way that is much more subtle than directly lying about Rupert Lowe, especially if he can have direct evidence that they are lying. Now, Rupert Lowe has not even addressed this since it has come out, and it's been 2 days, and given that he has frankly been on Twitter constantly trying to refute allegations, it's got to be very odd to people that he has not even addressed this. And neither have all the people who are on Rupert Lowe's side. I put this towards people, it's ignored. This is screaming to me that this is true and that the KC is being honest. This is screaming to me that Rupert Lowe has lied. This is screaming to me that now, yesterday when I was saying I don't know whose word to trust, I have slightly more reason to trust Reform's word over Rupert Lowe, because he has been actually caught out in a lie rather than having hearsay back toward one another. This is devastating for Rupert Lowe, and I find it frankly embarrassing that the online writer are ignoring this and still backing Lowe. There is much more to this story that we do not know. However, it is clear that Lowe is obfuscating the facts of the matter, and as I say, his narrative is a little bit all over the place. So just to be clear here, Rupert Lowe did actually address this BBC article directly and links it in this post. He says, ever since this malicious attack on my reputation was launched, all I have asked from both Reform and the KC is credible evidence against me, and none has been provided. Again, the KC's refuted this. The KC has refuted this. You have apparently been told there is credible evidence against you. Now, Mr. Lowe may not have been provided the direct evidence against him. Fair enough. In the process of the investigation, does he have a right to see his evidence? I'm not actually sure. I'd be surprised if he doesn't, though. But again, I'm willing to believe the KC is being relatively impartial in all this until I see evidence against it. Again, it's not exactly good for a KC's career if it turns out they've been directly and evidently biased in a case. Those that typically are biased, such as those in the Good Law Project, tend to get directly funded by these political interests. You don't really have that type of network on the right, and Reform especially don't have that network. So he then actually is open about what he was sent by the KC. I advise that you should simply say that the party was precipitous to state that these allegations had been made, without also saying that the party had commissioned an independent investigation and the investigation had not yet got underway to look at all the evidence and evaluate its veracity. Which, okay, fair enough. But as mentioned, that's not actually what he said, which isn't very good and means he's not actually following his own KC's advice, or the independent KC's advice, which again isn't very good form. I've spoken with the KC at length on the phone and through message. I've got to know her over the last week, and she has been very helpful, and is a charming lady who is trying to do her job in a very difficult position that the Reform has put her in. Okay, to suggest that I have not again, she's just called you a liar though. To suggest that I have not cooperated is an outright lie by Lee Anderson and Reform, and the KC hasn't commented on that. So again, that is still just one word against another. I've been in discussions with my legal team this afternoon, and this will be followed by legal action in due course. I will not have my name dragged through the mud as part of a political assassination because I dared to question Nigel Farage, which is the go-to narrative of Rupert Lowe's entire position. I am being attacked directly because I questioned Mr. Farage, which just so happens to be what Ben Habib always say. It's what an awful lot of people always say when they are kicked out of any of Nigel Farage's projects. And while Mr. Farage may have an ego, and while this may be a pattern, it is one of those things at this point where you think, well, if your aim is to stay in the party, it's not difficult to not publicly denigrate Nigel Farage. As I say, the current narrative at the moment is, from Reform side, is that Rupert Lowe was quite difficult to actually work with within the party, and it's basically all just come to a head, and his behaviour within his offices has not been to properly follow his duty of care to his staff. And then obviously there were the threats they made to Zaya Yusuf, or the allegations of threats, I should say, that's currently under police investigation. I just want to say at this point, the reason I'm slightly more willing to give Farage and Zaya more of the benefit of the doubt at this point as well, another reason for this, is that they both have direct stakes in Reform UK. And as sycophantic as some people are about Nigel Farage, don't get me wrong, I would find it shocking if they have actually lied about this, because frankly, if they have lied about this, now that is going to lead directly to losing support for the party and could even crash the damn thing. and they simply have too much at stake on it for them to lie about it from my perspective. Now that is not proof that they are not lying, that is more reason for me to give them benefit of the doubt. But as I said yesterday, I took all word equally. However, today, after the Casey's come out and said what she has said about Rupert Lowe's comments, I have now less reason to trust Rupert Lowe's word, and frankly you should too. Anyway, naturally, Reform MPs were directly asked about this entire tiffy because it was all over Twitter, which I would say again is relatively unusual for a case like this. You don't see it all over Twitter directly from the person being accused. Typically you would see, oh, I deny the allegations, and that would be it till the investigation's over. Rupert Lowe's not gone down that route. And again, whether it is righteous justice or whether it is him crafting his own narrative is frankly yet to be seen. We don't know. I'm not making conclusions. I want to make that very clear. But, well, this is what Richard Tice had to say about the whole thing on GB News while being interviewed by Camilla Tonley.
See what
he
happens.
claims he's innocent. If he's exonerated, will he be allowed back into
reform? You have to be able to work with people. You have to be a team player, okay?
So and it's a simple question, and I know you're good at answering questions, Mr. Tice. If he's exonerated, is he welcome back in reform?
Well, the whip has been withdrawn, and we want team players that will unite. I am actually. The whip has been withdrawn, and that should be the assumption. We're driving forwards. We're not holding back. We've got a job to do. We've got hundreds of seats to win in May. We're not going to be distracted by this noise. Okay. And do you know what? I don't think the British people will be either.
I think that's largely a fine response. It is a bit of a dodge of the question because really I think the official reform line on the inside will be, yeah, he's probably not going to be let back given his behaviour over the weekend. However, we're not going to publicly make a statement on that because, again, we don't want to make public statements on ongoing investigations. If he's exonerated, will he be back? Well, you have to be a team player. That seemed to be what the reply was. The implication, of course, being Rupert Lowe is not a team player. How true that is or not, I'm not sure. Basically everything I can gather is based on hearsay anyway, so it's hard to say. Rupert Lowe, though, once again commenting on this on Twitter, saying Tice has inadvertently revealed what's really going on here. I'm not welcome back in the party even if my innocence is proven. Again, that's not necessarily what was said. However, if you are saying you're not welcome back because you're not a team player, by all means say that. This is not a coordinated hit job to force me out to reform. This is a coordinated hit job to force me out to reform and has nothing to do with the false and damaging allegations against me that, once again, the Casey has had to come out and say, you can't actually say that. So, again, at this point, it just looks like narrative crafting to me, and I hate to say it, because I didn't think Rupert Lowe was like this. Anyway, that's kind of most of the hard evidence we have for the narratives we have so far. So the rest of this is basically the continuation of all the drama around it. So again, last night, Rupert Lowe tweeted this out. I've been informed by a reliable source that a senior reform figures have been briefing journalists that I have dementia. In politics, here is rough and tumble, and I get that, but this is sick and what they're doing to me is disgusting. Again, if they're lying about that, yes, fair enough, it is pretty disgusting. There were an awful lot of conversations that I saw where effectively there were people in the Worcester Club Discord effectively saying, if this bit's actually true, and they do actually think he has dementia, then basically they can see reasons why that would be true. However, my take on the whole thing has been, one, we don't know if this is actually true. This is Rupert Lowe saying this unnamed source has said this. And again, I don't want to make any assumptions until we have better evidence in this. An awful lot of this has been hearsay, and that's the main thing I want to make the point here. We've got to stop taking people at their word, and that kind of includes everyone within here. Has Rupert Lowe been a pain in the backside to the reform top brass over the past few months? I have no idea. I have no idea how true that is, and I'm not going to go ahead with the assumption that he was, just as I'm not going to go ahead with the assumption that reform figures have been saying he's got dementia. And this is the problem with the whole thing. Frankly, whether this is justified or not, running your mouth off on Twitter like this is never a good look. Regardless of if this is justified retribution or not. This is never going to be a good look. I don't think he's acting professionally here, and I think going ahead and posting rumours like this is, frankly, it's not too different to social media when I was 16. And frankly, yes, Rupert Lowe should take that as an insult. Anyway, naturally, because this was posted to Twitter, there were questions asked about representatives of Reform about this. Here's what Gawain Towler had to say.
Hang on a second. He said last night there are people putting it about that I've got dementia, right? He said that.
I have not heard anything of that sort, apart from that tweet from Rupert.
Which I want to make clear, that does not mean that it is not true. However, in all of this, Gawain is the person that I definitely trust the most. So if he's not heard it, I do believe him. However, it doesn't mean that people have been saying it outside of Gawain's earshot, let's say. Again, this is all hearsay, this is all the drama, and there is an awful lot of source of this drama, and frankly, yes, it's Rupert Lowe. I also want to say this might not be Rupert Lowe, purposefully lying about this. This could easily just be Rupert Lowe having a contact that's feeding him bad information to make him look more foolish. You never know. Anyway, there are also articles that were coming out with things like this. Sources close to Mr. Farage claim that Mr. Lowe has drifted politically from the leader, being captured by the online radical right, with a myriad ex-posts about mass deportation and other preoccupations. Social media platform has always been the centre of the dispute. It began in January when the party's official X-count stopped retweeting Mr. Lowe's post following Mr. Musk's tentative endorsements. To which a lot of people are saying, oh, that's Farage getting jealous. I think the counter-narrative I would put forward is, actually, I think it's the fact that the party wanted to have a fairly clean split from Tommy Robinson, frankly, and Mr. Lowe wasn't exactly the person doing that, let's say. He's been in interviews effectively saying Tommy Robinson shouldn't be in solitary confinement and things along those lines. And frankly, any time he's actually pushed on details that he knows about the case, he always basically comes out and says, oh, I don't really know the details of the case. Basically acting a bit of a... I'm going to have a lot of complaints about this, I know, but effectively like a Tommy NPC. And party lines were, don't act like a Tommy NPC. So there is the possibility that it is to do with that, but again, it could also very much well be Mr. Farage is getting jealous of his ability to garner a reputation on X. However, given that Mr. Farage constantly gets the most applause at conventions and at conferences and events, and given that an awful lot of the time on camera Mr. Farage is directly thanked by members of the public, I don't think that he is particularly worried about his popularity. That would be my counterfactual here. Anyway, Rupert had a response to this. It has been reported in today's Telegraph that sources in the Reform leadership close to Farage are upset with me because I've been outspoken on the need for a large number of deportations, and this is not new information to me. I want to make it quite clear here that it was issues with the radical online right. We are talking about people that have been supporting Mr. Lowe, such as, say, Steve Laws. People who are so electorally toxic they couldn't beat a shroom head. Other toxic people, such as, frankly, the Lotus Eaters, who, whenever they come up in the news, it's always bad news, and it always directly leads to damaging of public perception, and, therefore, people's votes when it comes to the mainstream. Now, we might not like this system, but it is the system that we are playing the game within. And one thing you have to say about Nigel Farage, he's very good at playing that game, hence he's topping an awful lot of polls. For now, it's been quite fortunate because what Mr. Lowe has said and this entire phenomenon, which I have kept a close eye on, so there's no denying that this is true, it has largely not been brought up an awful lot in the mainstream because it's not particularly important at the moment, but my God, it's like you're laying bear traps for when it comes to the election. Oh, you had all these people who are very uncouth supporting you. What do you have to say to that? And the problem is that if you've got 3 years of evidence of that, that's going to be quite the thing to have to actually deal with. I would imagine that is the problem they are having. We are not in a position where you can brazenly be saying, I want mass deportation, especially when, to most people, it's kind of a vague term, and they're going to think, oh, does that include getting rid of all brown and black people as well? Now, to be absolutely fair to Mr. Lowe, he is just talking about mass deportation of illegal immigrants and criminals. That is the detail of it. However, we're dealing with a mainstream that is going to lie about you. The best thing you can do is not set traps for them. Rupert Lowe has been setting traps for them. It's been something I've noticed and worried about for quite some time. However, to think that Nigel Farage is also against this sort of thing is ludicrous. Even from that classic Stephen Edgington clip, he says in the clip he obviously wants mass migration to end and to deport all illegals and all foreign criminals, just as Rupert Lowe does. He is just more honest about it and more realistic about it, saying that it's such a huge problem it's probably going to take more than a 5-year parliament to get done. Rupert Lowe kind of ignores that realistic side of it, to be quite frank, and obviously the party aren't quite happy with it because that probably isn't party line. However, it's made him very, very popular with the online right. There is no doubt about that. It's probably worth pointing out that this is an online right that when Elon Musk said Farage is not for the job and I like Rupert Lowe, they all jumped on that like nothing else. I said at the time that is probably going to be a basic loyalty test for Reform UK, and they found out that these people are loyal to Rupert Lowe only rather than the party, which is fine if that's their position, but do you think that Reform are going to be in any way open to anything you have to say on them? No, of course they're not. You've blown your own chances as far as I'm concerned. And honestly, after this, I don't see any way for the online right to get into mainstream politics ever again. How are you going to do it? Reform was your best chance and you blew it. And a lot of them are blowing it now as well. We don't know the result of all this. It's still all largely up in the air. However, from the facts that we do know, as I have gone through already, Rupert Lowe ain't looking good out of all this. He may have backed the wrong horse on this one. We don't know yet. That could be all completely wrong. Hence, I'm not firmly planting myself in the Reform side. However, they do seem to be a bit more honest about this whole thing so far. Anyway, I think one through line we can guarantee through all this is that there have been long-term tensions. Tim Montgomery, who was an ex-Conservative spokesperson, I think editor of Conservative Home, joined Reform a few months ago, and one thing he noticed was that very early on there were bubbling tensions between Farage and Lowe. So claims that there have been... not necessarily that Rupert Lowe has been a pain for Reform all that time, but at the very least, Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe haven't got on. It does seem to bear quite considerable weight. So this is something that has bubbled up after, frankly, quite a long time of them trying to keep a lid on this split in the party. Anyway, this morning the nonsense from Rupert Lowe continued. Day 11 of repeatedly asking to see any credible evidence against me, which is where one of the holes in his entire narrative kind of breaks down. At first, Rupert was acting like this was a bit of a surprise. He didn't know he was going to be investigated, and now he knows he's been investigated for 11 days, which takes us back to the 28th of February, which is when we were actually told the letters of complaint arrived at Reform UK head offices, which is helpful for the narrative that effectively he put out that interview from the Daily Mail as a preemptive attack. Effectively because this stuff was probably going to go public. And again, I don't know the details of these investigations too well. However, asking for credible evidence against you, do you have a right to it or not? I'm not entirely sure. As I said though, I am trusting that given that the KC has verified credentials, she's going through this investigation quite properly, and from the advice she gave Rupert Lowe, it doesn't seem too different from advice I've seen from KCs in the past. However, he's still clearly here trying to claim there's no credible evidence against him. The KC has come out and said he was never told, at the very least there's no evidence against him, which leads me to believe that his claims that there is no evidence against him is a lie. That is what it is. There was also this really strange tweet he made this morning as well. So Andrew Bridgen effectively says the plot thickens. A former parliamentary aide that he worked with went on to work for Rupert Lowe, and she said one of the staff involved in these allegations against him. She has told me her original complaint had nothing to do with Rupert personally, to which Rupert retweets saying, finally the main staff member involved has confirmed that her allegations are not about me. The second member's allegations are also not about me. Which, okay, we know. You already put that in your big, long rebuttal to Reform a couple of days ago. This is another big hole in the narrative. It changes from, oh look, they're saying it's me, to, oh no, it's actually nothing to do with me. And then every time it's got nothing to do with me comes up, he always pretends like from the start he was accused of bullying. That has never been the case. I went through the video on Saturday. That was never the case. This is a massive hole in this narrative, and again, this is leading me to not trust Rupert Lowe. In fact, this was so blazing that Lee Anderson had to come out and say this. Setting the record straight, the independent KC investigating the allegations has already publicly rebuked Mr Lowe for making false claims. As the KC statement made clear, the written complaints included allegations about the conduct of Mr Lowe. I ask Mr Lowe respects the independence of the investigation and refrains from making further false public statements, Lee Anderson, Chief Whip. It's got so bad that Rupert Lowe is having to constantly force out these responses from Reform. First one from Nigel, absolutely no need for. The second one from the KC, obviously there's a need for. If he's lying about the investigation and what he's been told, obviously that needs to be on public record. And then finally, Lee Anderson's had to once again reiterate, this is what the KC has told him so far, please stop lying about this. And I'm not being funny, but an independent KC along with all the Reform top brass versus, let's face it, the words from one man, I think I know who I'm going to trust more, especially when he keeps being caught out with these lies and when his narrative keeps leaving big plot holes in the middle of them. I'm sorry, but if I was saying this about Owen Jones and his tirade of tweets, I'm saying it about Rupert Lowe. This isn't great. This does not look good for Rupert Lowe, and people need to start appreciating that instead of blindly following him, because I think it's going to make an awful lot of people look stupid. I'm trying to keep my scepticism in both ways. I don't know if what Lee Anderson's saying here is the truth. We can only know that once investigations and police investigations have concluded. We're nowhere near there yet. And so all of this just seems to be Rupert Lowe trying to stir up drama and help with, frankly, his public relations to his base, which, as the Telegraph have pointed out, Reform have noticed is mostly on the online right. Yes, there are people IRL doing stuff that Reform that clearly will be disappointed by this, but I kind of hate to say it, the bubble around Rupert Lowe's popularity is mostly on the online right. A lot of other people think, yeah, he's a good MP, he's a good MP. However, whenever I hear anecdotes of people who work for Reform or volunteer for Reform or at the top brass of Reform, they're all pretty much saying the same thing, which is they don't really care about this. They're more worried about other issues. They have the odd question about what's going on, but as soon as they hear we can't really comment because there's an investigation going on, we have to wait till it's concluded, they say, oh, fair enough. That's mostly what's happening in the real world at this point. Yes, Rupert Lowe's popular, but I'm afraid that the online world has probably overestimated his popularity. And frankly, the way he's been acting, I think support for him should be questioned, or at least unquestioning support. Another thing I want to point out at this point is that there's an awful lot of consolidating with this attack on Reform. An awful lot of it. Joe Sopel, Century's dad podcast host of The Newsagents. The more I read, the more I think the rest of Reform leadership that have questions to answer over their behaviour. They're siding with Rupert Lowe. This is man who is face of the establishment, completely astroturfed in the online world, siding with Rupert Lowe. I'm sorry, we've got a question here. Are we on the right side if we're blindly following Lowe? I really don't think we are. Tory supporter Tim Stanley had this to say: the Civil War as a tiny party of Reform is both funny and tragic because they were leading in the polls before Rupert questioned Nigel's leadership, and it seems Nigel has responded with tact by humility by calling the police. Whether the claims against Lowe of bullying and threats of violence turn out to be accurate or not is unimportant, or almost unimportant. It's telling that they emerged shortly after he criticised Farage in public. I'm afraid Farage has form as dictator. The studios of GB News are littered with people he fell out with, then exiled, the Hamiltons having erected a Red Cross tent in the green room. There is a consolidation of attack on Nigel Farage as a result of all this. From, frankly, establishment figures. This should be raising alarm bells in the online right, and it's not. They're going along with it, which I find absolutely astounding. This is not in any way to say Rupert Lowe is in the wrong or Rupert Lowe is in the right. This is me making commentary that, hello, people, you have all been complaining about the establishment and how evil it is and how they'll take advantage of any tragedy for years. And now all of a sudden there's one against Farage who you've been complaining about for some years, despite him being perfectly adequate and managing to literally make the Labour and Tory party panic due to their success in the polls. All of a sudden you're with them on the attack to beat them down again. It raises a lot of questions that nobody is willing to address from the online right. I mean, this is what Tory representatives had to say when it came to, would you accept a Lowe defection?
So I haven't seen the figures. What I do know is that we've won 5 times more by-elections in Reform since the election. And I also know that Rupert Lowe said last week what everyone else has been thinking, which is that Reform is essentially a protest party without properly thought-through ideas, led by, in Rupert Lowe's words, a Messianic leader. He said they're not a serious party.
Will you
and then what happened just a few hours later, he got kind of stabbed in the back. Well, I don't think he's applied to join, but he's been clearly stabbed in the back by his own party.
I think you get the idea of all that. All just parroting Rupert Lowe, who in turn was parroting Ben Habib. And now we have had it from word of mouth that there is nothing actually stopping Rupert Lowe from, at the very least, applying to be a Tory MP. I don't think he's going to do it. I'd be absolutely shocked if he actually goes over to the Tories. And I mean, if that does happen, I have no idea what the online right are going to do about that information. However, it's quite clear to me that there is a consolidation of multiple aspects of the elite class, all focusing in to attack Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, using Rupert Lowe's narrative, because they're not going to look into this to any great detail. Frankly, I feel like I'm one of the only people online looking into this in any great detail, hence I'm making this video. There are things to be sceptical of here. Can we please acknowledge that? The last point I will make in this video, though, is that I mentioned Ben Habib a lot, and frankly, I think Ben Habib is behind the influence of how Rupert Lowe has been acting. In fact, he very much just says as much. Here he is on an interview with GB News.
But can I just read you a text you sent to Rupert Lowe at the end of February, which seems incredibly prescient? The drumbeat of a rift between you and Reform is getting louder. Don't let them throw you out and control the narrative. They'll find some cock and bull story to justify their decision, and any defence you offer will be dismissed as being wrong, bitter and twisted.
First, I'd like to point out the funny thing that this was sent at 11:59, making the morning Rupert accurate by within 60 seconds. However, already I'd like to point out that Ben Habib, being the colossal big brain he is, has basically admitted that actually this is all narrative crafting. That is what he has said here. I know the whole accusation that, oh, they'll make up some cock and bull story, as he put there, to try and get him out and find a decent excuse to get him out. And you know what? Might be correct. I'm still open to that possibility. However, with a KC directly telling Rupert Lowe it is basically a lie to say that there is no evidence against you, that tells me that this might not be quite as cock and bull as we think. But I just want to get this down. I have reason to believe this is a crafted narrative. This is probably why there's so many holes in it. This is probably why the KC has had to tell him that his statements are not accurate. And this is why I am telling all of you there is an awful lot of reasons to be very sceptical about this whole affair from Rupert's side. This looks like a direct attack to try and damage Reform as he is being kicked out, because as good as an MP as he is, apparently in every other aspect he's a bit useless. Maybe not every other aspect, that might be a bit harsh, but he is clearly a net negative from their point of view, and apparently there's enough evidence to say that there is actual reasonable reason to, well, at the very least suspend the whip. If it turns out that he's not exonerated, he's obviously losing it forever. But this entire narrative crafting and that ridiculous interview as well, there's every reason he's got to be kicked out. If these are trumped up charges, then fine, I won't trust Reform, and I will go along with the online right narrative that yes, Nigel Farage is not to be trusted. Fine. I am not seeing enough evidence for that to be the case yet, and everyone is acting as if there is. Anyway, they don't particularly read any more of this particular text, which again is confirmed to have been sent by Ben Habib, and it's one of the most damning things I think I've ever seen in my life. Let's just read the rest of this. If the rest is irreconcilable, as most are with Nigel, i.e. you're definitely going to be kicked out, you should take control of events and resign, then control the narrative and truth behind your riff and win over their lies. So effectively what he's being encouraged to do here is obviously resign, which he's not doing, so he's not followed that part, but he has been advised to try and control the narrative. And that, I think, is what is happening here. However, it's biting him in the behind, because obviously the KC has come out and had to correct the record, Lee Anderson has come out and had to correct the record, and not only that, he's having to correct his own record constantly. It's a total mess. He's not made a decent narrative, but everyone's going along with it, despite these blaring objections and holes in the whole narrative he's created. And wouldn't you know it, Ben Habib advised him to do it, the idiot-in-chief. Not particularly shocked at this, because Ben Habib has similar issues with all this. Anyway, Ben Habib then obviously answers the questions.
Absolutely. I'm so glad I wrote that text to Rupert, because I could see the direction of travel. It was a direction of travel that I've seen unfold for many, many good people in the grassroots of Reform who don't get a mention because no one knows them. But Zia Yusuf has systematically been going across the country, displacing people, and in the process rubbishing their reputation.
These are quite standard points from Ben Habib, and one thing I notice is that he can never really name names here. Oh, he's been going all over the country displacing people. Well, there's never any one high profile, and he does go in to say, oh, these are grassroots people that no one will know. Okay, well, why don't you get them out here and share their story? It's almost like it's nonsense.
Now, he's not here to defend himself on that, Ben, just to say he's not here to defend himself on that.
Again, not only that, but there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever of this. Again, he's been going up and down the country doing this, apparently. Well, he should have thousands of examples, and I am yet to actually see one. He should be able to name one off the top of his head here.
But I could see the same thing happening to Rupert. And so I woke up on that Friday morning and I texted Rupert and I said...
I do enjoy the idea that this was just something random that came out of his head, so he decided to straight away text him. And so the implication is that he woke up on Friday at like 11:45 to then text Rupert Lowe. I'm not buying this story. I think what's happened is that Rupert Lowe will still have contacts within Reform UK. That much is evident. I think he will have heard through the grapevine that evidence of these letters had come through and that they are probably going to have to do an investigation, and having heard that, preempted Rupert to encourage him to start this narrative building, and possibly even to do that interview. I will say, a fair point on all this is that it's been claimed that that interview was conducted on the 25th of February, which was before these letters even came through. However, one thing I'm finding very odd is that I'm no expert on journalism, so this is something that the comments are really going to have to let me know on, but I would not... It doesn't seem to be common practice that you have an interview with especially someone in Parliament and then sit on it for 2 weeks. If it happened on the 28th, it came out last Friday, that is... Sorry, the interview was the 25th and it came out last Friday. That is a wait of, I think, 11 days. That is 11 days of sitting on this article that, frankly, was a hit piece on Farage. There's an awful lot about this that should be raising massive questions on all this. I do want to say at this point as well, if you think that's a bit of a reach, then fair enough. That I am massively speculating there, and it could just be that these are Rupert Lowe's real feelings. The problem is that so much around this, circumstantial evidence, it's making me a bit wary of all this. I've lost quite a bit of trust in Rupert Lowe as this story has gone on, and obviously because of that, I'm maybe having to make things fit where they don't quite fit. However, as I say, I would argue that this is the first time I've had to reach in this entire video, and given that we're nearly at an hour again, I'd say that's not too bad considering the topic at hand. So forgive me if I do a bit of reaching there, but at the end of the day, if I see Ben Habib involved in anything to do with criticisms of reform, I raise an eyebrow.
Rupert, just be aware that I think this is where it's going. They're going to rubbish your character, they're going to sack you, rubbish your character, and then any defence you put up will be portrayed as bitter and twisted and irrelevant.
So this is kind of a mask-off moment for Ben. A lot of people do call him bitter after what happened to Reform, and that's because Ben turned into a bitter man. I've been through an awful lot of his criticisms on Reform, and I find them largely easily refutable. As I went through with Lowe's interview as well, largely refutable.
And so get ahead of the game and resign. And exactly what I predicted happened.
I want to point out as well, I wouldn't say that they've exactly been character assassinating him. Don't get me wrong, there's been stories of, he's been a bit of a pain behind the scenes. That's about as bad as it's got. And the other example that they keep bringing up, which, okay, it's the only example they bring up, however, it is the only example I can think of that is public, was the altercation with the Labour MP in the House of Commons. However, every time I have seen an actual statement from Reform, bar obviously the allegations one, there's always, the first thing they always say is Rupert is a great MP. That seems to be what they always say. If you're going to character assassinate someone, typically, you don't really soften the blow with that. At least from what I can tell. There was none of that when it came to Ben Habib, for example.
They have attempted actually not just to rubbish Rupert. Let's just get this into perspective. They haven't just attempted to rubbish Rupert, they've attempted to destroy him. When you make an application to the police, when you make a complaint to the police about physical threats of violence, you're actually putting this into a domain where Rupert could be, however frivolous the claim, and it's an entirely frivolous claim, otherwise it would have been made back in December, however frivolous the claim, you are putting a man's personal liberty in danger.
I mean, just to push back on that a bit, I see a lot of talk around the Zahir Yusuf threat, and it's one of those, it's certainly the part of this that I can't quite square away, and why I'm not quite on the full side backing Reform, because it's not like there's only questions going one way here. However, the thing is, thinking about it, if there was a threat made back in December and they didn't take action on it, from the looks of it, it is because they were trying to keep a lid on this upcoming split within the party. Obviously, it's upcoming in hindsight. And so they didn't make a report to the police because it's, just ignore it, it's a one-off. However, Richard Tice actually, just to go into extra detail on it, I actually had to download the whole YouTube video for GB News, so since I've got it, I may as well play it. But Richard Tice actually said this.
And responsible thing to do. There was a further threat made to Zia literally last week. So at the end of the day...
What's the nature of these threats?
I'm not going to go into any details of that, but...
So the second threat was actually made last week. Out of the two, one was back in December, the second was last week. The thing is, when you make a police report of, OK, I've had another threat, the police will say, another. So both the threats have been reported because, frankly, it would be odd just to do one without the other. And again, why didn't they do it the first time? Because clearly their entire mission here has been, right, there's only 5 of us, getting rid of 1/5 of us is obviously going to be an issue. So we're going to ignore this, assuming it's true, of course. And so this is the thing. You have to wait for the police investigation to really make a conclusion on this. However, I don't think it's out the realm of possibility that they sat on that first threat, because ultimately when he made the second, that's when it was just untenable from then on. Again, assuming it's all true. We have to wait for an awful lot of information on this. And Richard Tice is quite right in not going into details on this, because as we've seen from Rupert Lowe, you're implicating yourself and it's not going to end well for you if you do comment on these things. So Richard Tice is going through what is already public knowledge. Rupert is trying to go into details of the case that aren't public knowledge. And he's basically been told by the KC that not only should he not do that, but that when he has done it, some of it has been a bit misleading, to put it charitably. And this is another reason why at this point I am seeing more reason to trust the reform side of things rather than Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe's side. And Ben Habib is another type who has frankly fallen into the online right sphere of defending Tommy Robinson to some extent up to the hilt, joining on with alternative media such as the Lotus Eaters, where there's absolutely no pushback and they appear to be largely parroting his criticisms as well, which, as I've gone through many times over, it's just frankly nonsense. Obviously, he's found popularity there. Rupert Lowe has also found popularity there. And as I say, everyone's got the incentive to be popular, especially if you're in politics. And so it appears to me that they've gone down this route, this niche, if you will. And to me, it looks like that they've really kind of put themselves into this little corner that I keep having to tell people does not seem to translate into votes, does not seem to reflect popular opinion. And so the further down you go down this route, the more people are going to start looking at you cockeyed. Now, Rupert's been quite good, and I think a large reason Rupert's been quite good is because he's had the advantage of effectively having to deal with Reform top brass, who are all telling him, are all telling him, please stay on message. Ben Habib does not have that, and he's also not an MP, to be fair, but either way, with that, I think if he does go to carry on being independent and starts having, let's say, a less leashed attitude as an independent MP, I would imagine his popularity starts to wane. I absolutely do not want that to happen. I don't wish for that to be the case. I am giving you my prediction from, frankly, precedent we have seen of this in the past. I'd call it cooked, unprincipled, whatever you want to call it. The fact of the matter is that trying to be hard line on all these things doesn't tend to win you votes. At the end of the day, we're trying to win power here. And I don't really buy that a lot of people on the online right really care about power. I don't really think. In fact, there's no way I can think they truly believe that. There is no way you can watch Reform go up in the polls while being cooked, as they say, for months, and end up, as I say, at the top of the polls, while parties that the online right tend to lean more towards, let's say Homeland, are celebrating just getting over 1,000 members. At the end of the day, we're trying to win power in the UK here. That is the main thing that matters. This is a clear split to the right of the Uni Party. And as much as the Tories are trying to cope and see that they're definitely moving right, I don't know why we would trust them. And I don't know why you would trust them when they are paralleling and parroting the same nonsense that Ben Habib has and that Rupert Lowe has amplified. There's an awful lot to be suspicious of here. There's no conclusions that we can really make from here, as I have said. However, there is no way I can ignore all of the evidence that has been given to us over this weekend. Rupert Lowe, frankly, has embarrassed himself. And I mean that whether or not these are trumped-up allegations. He has acted completely unprofessionally. You should absolutely not be commenting on ongoing investigations, and you should definitely not be going on a live broadcast as he's going on with Dan Wootton to talk about it. I think he's been influenced by Ben Habib to try and create this narrative. I think the narrative has an awful lot of holes and it's not well thought through. I think the Casey having to come out and effectively tell him that he's lying should be damning and put a lot of people off him, but it hasn't. I feel like I am having to talk to people who are in hysterics about this, and it is largely bothering me and once again disillusioning me to online politics. It seems like a dead end as a whole, let alone just Homeland. And that really saddens me because I joined this community and I have wanted to be a voice in this community to keep sensible heads in place because that's the best way forward. But if that's impossible, I guess the only choice is to go real life with politics. I'm still going to make these things for a hobby, don't get me wrong. I'm not dissatisfied. I absolutely love doing things like this, and hell, I absolutely love arguing with people. However, the whole reason I set up this channel in the first place was to try and be as honest and truthful as possible. And I feel like I am doing this here. And I feel like I'm having to tell everyone else where their blind spots are. And I know that's going to end up with a lot of people in the comments disagreeing with me, as you did yesterday, and I frankly encourage it. I would just say, let's all please be sensible about the things we are seeing. There is an awful lot to this situation that people are ignoring, and that is massively bothering me. And I don't really know why that is. And I'm afraid that being charitable in the motivations behind all this is getting harder and harder to justify. Anyway, I think with that, I've done another hour-long video, so I think that'll do it for today. Tomorrow over on the Worcester Club, we have a Tosh News, so do come along to that. Naturally, I think I'll have plenty more to say on this issue because it's been everywhere in the news for the past weekend. Obviously, we'll be covering other news as well, because other things have happened that I really need to catch up on. Saturday, it's Laughing at the Guardian with some women. My brother is on it, so if you've been looking forward to hearing a left-wing perspective on everything, then please do come along to that. Other guests I still need to gather. Videos out as and when I can make them. I'm just letting you know now, if you've made it this far in the video, there's probably not going to be one tomorrow due to prior commitments, but hey, I'm not being funny. I made 6 videos last week. I think I earned a break. If you want to help out the channel, do subscribe, leave a like and leave a comment letting me know what you think. Those are really good ways to help me out in the algorithm. If you want to go further, you can always give a super chat or super thanks in my comment section or live streams. Those are very direct and useful ways to help the channel. Or you can become a channel member and you get the benefit of going through all my old streams. I have over 100 of them, so it's pretty good value for money. Anyway, with that, I think that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.